The grand lobby of Sterling National Bank was a cathedral built to honor money. Marble floors, the color of cream and jade, stretched out under a ceiling so high it seemed to hold its own weather. Sunlight streamed through towering arched windows, catching motes of dust that danced like tiny golden coins in the air. The scent of old wood, polished brass, and the crisp, clean smell of currency hung in the reverent silence, broken only by the soft clacking of keyboards and the deferential murmur of transactions. It was a place designed to make the average person feel small. It was designed to remind everyone who entered of the immense power held within its walls. Eleanor Vance did not feel small. She felt patient. She stood in the queue, a picture of quiet simplicity. Her coat was a plain, dark wool, worn at the cuffs but impeccably clean. Her shoes were sensible, comfortable, and showed the signs of many miles walked. Her hands, clasped loosely in front of her, were wrinkled but strong, the hands of a woman who had known both hard work and gentle care. Her hair was a crown of silver and gray, neatly tied back, framing a face that held the wisdom of 70 years. She was a black woman, simple in her attire, serene in her posture, and in the opulent, self-important theater of the bank, she was utterly invisible to some and an object of immediate suspicion to others. She watched the people around her. Men in suits that cost more than her entire wardrobe strode past the line, nodding to the manager who greeted them by name. Women with gleaming jewelry and sharp, assessing eyes were ushered to private desks with practiced smiles. Eleanor simply waited. She had waited for much longer, for much more important things. This was nothing. Finally, it was her turn. She approached the counter, the polished marble feeling cool beneath her fingertips. The teller, a young woman with a tight, professional smile that did not reach her eyes, looked past Eleanor to the next person in line. "Next, please," she had called before realizing her mistake. Her eyes flickered over Eleanor's worn coat, and the professional smile tightened into a mask of polite impatience. "Can I help you?" Eleanor slid a check across the counter. It was a cashier's check, crisp and official, drawn from a well-known charitable foundation. The amount was significant. $50,000. The teller's eyes widened slightly as she read the number. Her gaze lifted from the check and settled on Eleanor, a new, colder suspicion dawning in her expression. She looked from the check to the woman and back again. The two did not compute in her mind. "I'll need to see 2 forms of identification," the teller said, her voice now clipped and devoid of any warmth. Eleanor calmly provided her state identification card and her social security card. The teller scrutinized them, holding the ID up to the light, comparing the photo to the serene face before her. Everything matched perfectly. Still, the doubt lingered, thick and ugly. She tapped a button on her console. "I need manager assistance at Station 4. A moment later, he appeared. Mr. Harrington. He was the branch manager, a man who wore his authority like a tailored suit. He was tall, with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a condescending smile that he seemed to reserve for situations he considered beneath him. Right now, he was directing that smile at Eleanor. "What seems to be the problem, Jessica?" he asked the teller, pointedly ignoring Eleanor. "This lady," the teller said, gesturing vaguely, "is trying to cash this." Harrington picked up the check, holding it between 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. He glanced at the amount, then let his eyes perform a slow, insulting appraisal of Eleanor, from her simple shoes to her weathered face. A soft, dismissive chuckle escaped his lips. $50,000, he said, drawing out the words. He looked at Eleanor directly for the first time, his eyes filled with a smug, theatrical disbelief. "That's a lot of money. Where did someone like you get a check like this?" Eleanor's expression did not change. Her voice, when she spoke, was level and clear. "I would like it deposited into my account, please." "Your account," Harrington repeated, the chuckle turning into a full, patronizing laugh. "Of course, your account, and I suppose you have millions already in there, just waiting for this little drop in the bucket." The lobby, once filled with a low hum, was growing quiet. People were turning to watch the unfolding drama. They saw a powerful, well-dressed bank manager and a poor, elderly black woman. Their sympathies, or their lack thereof, fell along predictable lines. "I just want to make my deposit," Eleanor said again, her patience a stone wall against which his arrogance crashed. Her calm seemed to infuriate him. It was a refusal to play the part he had assigned her. She was supposed to be flustered, intimidated, perhaps even frightened. She was none of those things. "This is obviously fraudulent," Harrington declared loudly, for the benefit of his growing audience. "People like you think you can just walk in here with a forged piece of paper and we'll just hand over a fortune. This is not a soup kitchen. This is a respected financial institution." "The check is perfectly valid," Eleanor stated. "It is from the Vance Family Foundation." Harrington scoffed. "The Vance Foundation? Of course. I'm sure you're a close personal friend of the Vances. Do you have tea with them on Sundays?" The cruelty was deliberate, designed to humiliate, to put her in her place. He wanted to make an example of her. He wanted to show everyone in this temple of wealth that he was its gatekeeper, and he would not suffer the unworthy to pass. Eleanor simply held his gaze. "The check is valid," she repeated a third time. That was when Harrington did something that shocked even the most indifferent onlookers. With a flourish of theatrical disgust, he took the check in both hands, and he ripped it in half. A collective gasp went through the lobby. The two halves of the $50,000 check fluttered down onto the marble counter. "There," Harrington said, his voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "That's what we do with fraudulent documents in my bank." He brushed his hands together as if cleaning them of filth. "Now, I suggest you leave before I have security escort you out for attempting to commit fraud." The air was thick with stunned silence. The tellers stared, frozen. The customers in line shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between the imperious manager and the still, silent woman. Some wore expressions of faint disapproval, but no one spoke up. No one moved to intervene. The security guard near the door shifted his weight, his hand moving instinctively closer to his belt, his eyes trained on Eleanor as if she were the source of the disturbance and not its victim. They were all complicit in their silence. But Eleanor did not look at the torn check. She did not look at the stunned faces in the crowd. She did not even flinch. Her gaze remained fixed on Mr. Harrington, and for the first time, the profound patience in her eyes was joined by something else. It was not anger. It was judgment. She stood there, a pillar of dignity in a sea of cowardice and contempt, and her quiet composure was a louder condemnation than any shout could ever be. Her refusal to break, to cry, to be diminished, was an act of defiance that Harrington could not comprehend. It enraged him. "What are you still doing here?" he snarled. "Did you not hear me? Get out!" Eleanor finally moved. She reached out a steady hand and picked up the two halves of the torn check. She held them in her palm, looking at them for a long moment. Then she looked back at Harrington. "You have made a grave error," she said, her voice soft, yet carrying across the silent lobby with the weight of a prophecy. Harrington laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "An error? My only error was wasting this much time on you. You think you belong here? You think this worthless paper gives you any right to stand in this building?" He was goading her, intoxicated by his own power, by the public spectacle of his dominance. He decided to heighten the humiliation, to turn it into a game for his audience. "I'll tell you what," he announced, his voice booming. "Let's make a little wager. If you can prove, right here, right now, that you have any legitimate business in this bank, any right to be here at all, I will personally apologize and process this transaction for double the amount. $100,000, from my own pocket if I have to." A murmur went through the crowd. It was a foolish, arrogant boast, an impossible challenge thrown down like a gauntlet. How could this woman possibly prove such a thing? Harrington smiled, basking in the perceived glory of his magnanimous, impossible offer. He had won. He expected her to shrink away, defeated. Instead, Eleanor Vance met his gaze, and a faint, sad smile touched her lips. "I accept your terms," she said, her voice ringing with newfound clarity. The crowd leaned in. "However," she continued, "my stakes are different." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle into the silent room. "If I prove my right to be here," she declared, "you will not give me any money. You will simply be removed from this building, and you will never set foot inside it, or any other building bearing this name, ever again." A gasp rippled through the lobby. This was not the response anyone had expected. The quiet, simple woman was not just accepting the challenge. She was raising the stakes to an unbelievable height. Harrington stared at her, momentarily speechless. Then he threw his head back and roared with laughter. "Done," he boomed, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "By all means, the stage is yours. Prove your right to be here. We are all waiting." He crossed his arms, a smug, triumphant smirk plastered on his face. The trap was set. The humiliation would be absolute. But as Eleanor stood there, holding the two halves of the check, her mind was not on the smug man in front of her. It was drifting back in time. She remembered a different kind of bank. It had been a tiny storefront office, rented with every last penny she and her husband, David, had saved. She remembered painting the walls herself, while David, a brilliant, tireless young man with dreams that far outsized their small space, worked on the business plan. He had had a vision. David had come from nothing, and he had seen how the big banks treated people like him, people with good ideas but no collateral, people with character but no connections. He believed a bank should be a partner to the community, a force for building dreams, not just a vault for the already rich. "A bank's real foundation isn't marble, Ellie," he had told her, his eyes burning with passion. "It's trust. It's respect for every single person who walks through that door, whether they have $10 or 10 million each." That had been their guiding principle. For 40 years, they had built their empire on that foundation. From that one small office, the Vance Banking Corporation had grown into a national institution, with branches in every major city. They had become fabulously wealthy, but they had never forgotten where they came from. They had lived comfortably, but simply. They had created the Vance Family Foundation, pouring hundreds of millions of dollars back into the communities that had helped them grow, funding scholarships, small businesses, and housing projects. David had taught her everything. She had not just been his wife, she had been his partner. She sat in on board meetings, she reviewed financial reports, she knew the name of every single one of their original employees. She understood the soul of the company as well as he did. Then, 6 months ago, David had passed away. He had battled his illness with the same quiet strength he had applied to every challenge in his life. In his final days, he had held her hand, his grip frail, but his gaze as intense as ever. "It's all yours now, Ellie," he had whispered. "The company, the foundation, everything. I've made you the sole owner, the chairwoman of the board. They'll try to tell you to sell, to let the professionals handle it. Don't listen." He had coughed, a painful, rattling sound. "The soul of the company is getting weak," he had continued. "I've heard things. Managers who have forgotten our purpose, who see customers as numbers on a spreadsheet, who judge people by the clothes on their back. It would break my heart to see everything we built become just another cold, heartless machine." He had looked deep into her eyes. "Promise me, Ellie. Promise me you'll keep its soul alive. Go and see for yourself. Remind them what we stand for." She had promised. And now, here she was fulfilling that promise. After David's death, she had heard whispers from old, trusted friends within the company. Whispers about this specific branch. Whispers about its manager, Mr. Harrington, a man known for his numbers but infamous for his arrogance and his disdain for low-value customers. So she had devised this test. She had dressed in the simple, sturdy clothes of her youth, the kind of clothes she wore when she and David were just starting out. She had arranged for a check from her own foundation to be sent to a local charity, and she had come to deposit it herself as an anonymous woman off the street. She had wanted to see, with her own eyes, if the soul of her husband's legacy was still alive in this branch. The torn paper in her hand was the answer. It was worse than she had imagined. The memory faded, and she was back in the cold marble lobby, the smug face of Mr. Harrington waiting expectantly. The sadness in her heart solidified into a cold, hard resolve. She was no longer just a grieving widow. She was the guardian of a legacy. She was the awakened lion. "Well," Harrington prodded, his voice oozing impatience. "We're waiting for this grand proof." Eleanor did not answer him with words. She turned from the counter. Ignoring the stares, the whispers, and the arrogant smirk of the man who thought he had cornered her, she began to walk. She did not walk towards the exit. She walked with a slow, deliberate purpose towards a quiet, overlooked corner of the grand lobby. In that corner sat a single, ornate, high-backed armchair. It was an antique, a piece from the original bank, preserved for its historical value. To most, it was just a decoration. "Where's she going?" someone whispered. "Security," Harrington barked, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "Stop her. She's probably trying to steal something." The young security guard started forward, his hand now firmly on his equipment belt. "Ma'am, you need to stop right there." Eleanor did not stop. She did not even look at him. She moved with an unhurried grace that seemed to create a force field around her. The guard slowed, a strange uncertainty staying his hand. There was no threat in her posture, only an unnerving sense of purpose. She reached the antique chair. She ran her fingers gently along the carved mahogany armrest, a familiar comfort. Her fingers found what they were looking for. A tiny, almost invisible knot in the wood, a slight imperfection that was not an imperfection at all. It was a button she had watched David press 1,000 times over the years. With a soft click, she pressed it. For a second, nothing happened. Harrington let out a relieved, mocking laugh. "Is that it? Is your proof that you can touch the furniture? Security, get her out of here now." But his words were cut short by a low, grinding sound. It was the sound of stone on stone. Every head in the bank snapped towards the source of the noise. A large section of the solid marble wall next to the chair, a section that had looked as permanent as a mountain, was sliding smoothly and silently to the side. It revealed a dark, hidden opening. The laughter died in Harrington's throat. The whispers in the crowd ceased. A profound, tomb-like silence fell over the entire bank. Every employee, every customer, every single person stood frozen, their mouths agape. Inside the hidden opening, soft lights flickered on, illuminating a small, exquisitely appointed private elevator. Its walls were paneled in the same rich mahogany as the chair, its floor carpeted in a deep, plush crimson. The young security guard stood rooted to the spot, his face a mask of utter bewilderment. This changed everything. This was beyond his training. This was beyond anyone's comprehension. Harrington's face, which had been a canvas of smug arrogance, now began a rapid, horrifying transformation. The smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion. The confusion morphed into wide-eyed denial. He knew of this elevator. He had heard the legends. The Founder's Lift. It was installed by David Vance himself decades ago, a private conveyance that led directly to the owner's penthouse office and the main boardroom on the top floor. It was for the exclusive, personal use of the Vance family and the chairman of the board. No one had used it in years. Most current employees thought it was just a myth, a story told to new hires. But Harrington knew it was real. And as the reality of what he was seeing crashed down upon him, the denial in his eyes gave way to a dawning, sickening terror. His face went pale, the color draining from it as if a plug had been pulled. A fine sheen of cold sweat broke out on his forehead. His carefully constructed world of power and prestige was beginning to tremble. He stared at the simple, elderly woman standing beside the impossible elevator, and for the first time, he did not see a poor, insignificant fraud. He saw a ghost. He saw a judge. He saw his doom. Eleanor Vance stood by the open elevator doors, the soft light from within casting a halo around her silver hair. She turned, her calm gaze sweeping over the sea of stunned faces, finally coming to rest on the ashen, terrified face of Mr. Harrington. Her voice, when she spoke, was no longer soft. It was filled with the quiet, unshakable authority of a queen reclaiming her throne. "My name," she announced, her words echoing in the cavernous silence, "is Eleanor Vance." She let the name hang in the air for a moment, a key turning in a lock that had been sealed for too long. "My late husband, David Vance, built this bank from the ground up with his bare hands and a belief in the dignity of all people." She took a step towards Harrington, who involuntarily flinched back. "This is my building," she said, her voice dropping to a low, powerful tone. "This is my bank. This is my legacy." She held up the two halves of the torn check. "And you, Mr. Harrington," she said, her eyes boring into his, "are a trespasser." At that exact moment, the great front doors of the bank swung open. A distinguished-looking man in a perfectly tailored gray suit entered, followed by two large, stern-faced men in corporate security uniforms. The man in the suit was Mr. Peterson, the chief operating officer of the entire Vance Banking Corporation, and a man who had been David Vance's most trusted friend and right hand for 30 years. He strode purposefully across the marble floor, his eyes fixed on Eleanor. He stopped before her and gave a slight, respectful bow of his head. "Madam Chairwoman," he said, his voice resonating with deference. "I apologize for the delay. We came as quickly as we could." He held up a small, sleek tablet. "We have it all," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The branch's high-definition security system has been streaming directly to corporate headquarters since you entered. We have crystal-clear audio and video of this entire, disgraceful encounter." Peterson then turned his steely gaze upon the trembling form of Mr. Harrington. "Mr. Harrington," he began, his voice cold and sharp as splintered ice. "Pursuant to Sections 4, 11, and 18 of your executive employment contract, your employment with the Vance Banking Corporation is terminated, effective immediately." Harrington made a choking sound, a pathetic gurgle of protest. Peterson was not finished. "Your transgressions include, but are not limited to, gross misconduct, willful destruction of a valid financial instrument, public defamation of the owner and chairwoman of this corporation, and a flagrant violation of the Vance Dignity Mandate, the core ethical principle of this entire company." He gestured to the two security officers, who now moved to flank the paralyzed manager. "Our legal department will be in contact with you regarding the clawback of your last 3 years of bonuses. Furthermore, we will be pursuing civil charges for damages to the corporation's reputation. A summary of your actions and your termination will be circulated to every financial institution in the country. You will never work in this industry again." The finality of the words hung in the air like a death sentence. It was a complete and total annihilation, delivered with the cold, precise efficiency of a surgeon. Harrington finally found his voice, a desperate, sputtering squeak. "No, wait. You can't," he stammered, his eyes darting wildly around the room, looking for an ally, a friendly face, but finding only a gallery of shocked, pitiless stares. His gaze fell upon Eleanor, and his arrogance was replaced by a sniveling, pathetic plea. "Please, Madam Vance, I beg you. It was a misunderstanding, a terrible mistake. I didn't know. If I had known who you were." Eleanor cut him off, her voice quiet but unyielding. "That is the entire point, Mr. Harrington," she said. "You should not have had to know who I was." Her words struck him silent. The two corporate security officers took him firmly by the arms. He offered no resistance. The fight had drained out of him, replaced by a hollow, vacant shock. One of the officers reached out and unclipped the gold name badge from his lapel. "Mr. A. Harrington, branch manager." The officer dropped it onto the marble floor, where it landed with a cheap, tinny clatter. They began to march him towards the entrance, a silent, grim procession. His expensive suit now looked like a costume on a broken mannequin. His perfectly coiffed hair was disheveled. His face was a ruin of sweat and terror. As he was frog-marched past the line of customers and the row of his former employees, he was forced to endure the full weight of their silent judgment. The same audience that had witnessed his arrogant cruelty now witnessed his utter and complete humiliation. The great glass doors opened, and he was thrust out into the afternoon sunlight. The doors swung shut behind him with a soft, final whoosh, sealing his fate. Silence reigned once more in the cathedral of money. Eleanor Vance turned to face the stunned tellers and the wide-eyed customers. She stood before them, not as a vengeful queen, but as a teacher. "Let this be a lesson to every single person in this room," she said, her voice carrying the moral authority she had earned. "A bank's foundation is not marble or gold. It is not in the suits we wear or the titles on our desks. It is built on trust. It is built on respect." She looked from face to face, ensuring each person felt the weight of her words. Every person who walks through these doors, whether they are here to deposit $10 or $10 million, deserves to be treated with dignity. Their worth is not for us to judge. She paused, letting the lesson sink in. From this day forward, that will not just be a principle. It will be the law in this building, and in every building that bears the Vance name. We will be a bank for all people, or we will be nothing at all. She then turned to the young teller, Jessica, who stood pale and trembling behind the counter. Eleanor offered her a kind, understanding look. "You have a choice to make," she said gently. "You can learn from this, or you can follow him out that door." Tears welled in the young woman's eyes, and she nodded vigorously, a silent promise to do better. Eleanor gave a slight nod in return. Then, with a final look around the lobby that was once again hers, she turned and stepped into the founder's lift, the two halves of the check still held gently in her hand. Mr. Peterson followed her in, and the mahogany doors slid shut, leaving the people in the lobby to grapple with the monumental event they had just witnessed. 6 months later, the world looked very different for both Eleanor Vance and Arthur Harrington. Harrington's fall had been as swift as it was brutal. Blacklisted from the entire financial sector, his name toxic, he found himself unemployable in the world he had once commanded. His wife, a woman who had married his status and his income, left him within a month, taking the majority of their assets in a merciless divorce settlement. His powerful friends no longer returned his calls. He had been forced to sell their lavish suburban home, his luxury car, and his collection of expensive watches. The legal fees from the corporation's civil suit had wiped out what little remained. Now he lived in a small, bleak apartment above a noisy laundromat, the air thick with the smell of detergent and regret. To make ends meet, he had taken a job as a cleaner. He worked the night shift at a downtown office building, ironically, one that housed a rival bank. Every night, he pushed a mop across floors of polished marble, just like the ones in his old lobby. He emptied trash cans filled with the discarded paperwork of young, ambitious bankers who looked just like he once had. He was invisible, a ghost haunting the periphery of the life he had lost. Sometimes, late at night, he would catch his reflection in the dark, gleaming windows. He would see not a powerful manager, but a stooped, tired man in a gray janitor's uniform, his face etched with the permanent humiliation of his downfall. He was haunted by the memory of a calm, elderly woman's voice, telling him he should not have had to know who she was. It was a lesson learned far, far too late. For Eleanor Vance, the past 6 months had been a rebirth. Stepping out of the shadows of her grief, she had embraced her role as the active chairwoman of the Vance Banking Corporation. Her story, which had leaked to the press, had become a sensation. She was on the cover of Forbes and Fortune magazine, not as a titan of industry, but as a moral compass for modern capitalism. She had immediately implemented sweeping changes across the entire corporation. The Vance Dignity Mandate was now a mandatory, rigorous training program for every single employee from the boardroom to the mailroom. It focused on empathy, anti-prejudice, and the core philosophy of her husband, that the bank's primary client was the community itself. She established a new, revolutionary microloan program called David's Dream, specifically designed to fund small businesses and entrepreneurs in underserved and minority communities, the very people Harrington would have sneered at. It required no traditional collateral, basing its lending decisions on character, community references, and the strength of the applicant's idea. Critics had called it financial suicide, but the program was a staggering success, with a repayment rate that exceeded that of their traditional commercial loans. It turned out that giving people a chance and treating them with respect was an excellent business model. The bank's public image soared, attracting a new generation of socially conscious customers and investors. Profits, contrary to the critics' predictions, had never been higher. Eleanor Vance had not just saved the soul of her company. She had proven that a company with a soul could be more successful than one without. She had used her power not for vengeance, but for transformation, creating a legacy of opportunity and respect that would honor her husband's memory far more than any marble statue could. The story of the manager who tore up a check, not knowing it was for the owner of the bank, became a legend. But for those who truly understood, the lesson was deeper. It was never about the woman being the owner. That was simply the mechanism for justice. The real story was about a man who believed a person's worth could be judged by their appearance, and a woman who knew that true value lies within. It is a timeless lesson, a reminder that prejudice is a prison built by the arrogant for themselves, and that dignity is a quiet, unshakable fortress. It proves that character is the only currency that never loses its value, and that in the end, we are all measured not by the height of our station, but by the depth of our respect for others.